I'm Emily Carter, 30 years old, and on my wedding day, the air smelled like roses and frosting thick enough to choke on. The band had just switched to a slow tune when my mother leaned in for the photographer's flash, her smile as polished as the silverware, and said softly, "We're passing the car. His parents gave you over to your sister." My sister Rachel stood beside her sequins, catching the light like little shards of glass. "Relax," she whispered with a laugh. "It's just a car." Around us, the laughter kept floating, the cameras kept clicking, and for a moment, no one noticed the chill that settled in my chest. My husband Noah didn't speak. He simply looked at them, steady and unreadable. That look changed everything. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to smile through something that cut a little too deep. I grew up in a house where kindness was expected, but fairness was optional. My mother, Linda, loved things that sparkled polished floors, perfect photographs, her reputation as the woman who had it all under control. My father, Mark, preferred silence to conflict, and that silence became the wallpaper of my childhood. Rachel, the youngest, was the family's fragile gem. If she scraped her knee, the whole household bent to comfort her. When she forgot chores or broke something, Mom said she was sensitive. When I made a mistake, it was careless. The rules bent around her like soft clay. For me, they stayed sharp enough to cut. By the time I was a teenager, I had learned the quiet art of staying useful. I fixed Rachel's projects, handled her excuses, and listened to Mom explain that being the responsible one was good practice for adulthood. In our house, love often sounded like delegation. I cooked, cleaned, earned praise for being reliable, and was rewarded with more responsibility. My mother's approval was rationed carefully. A compliment one day, criticism the next, always just enough to keep me striving for more. College was my first taste of air that wasn't filtered through expectation. I studied interior design and worked nights at a diner, scraping together enough to pay tuition when my parents' help fell through. I built a small portfolio, took on clients, and learned how to make something beautiful from almost nothing. Somewhere along the way, I started to think maybe that was my purpose, turning chaos into order, even if it meant ignoring the noise inside my own head. Then I met Noah. He wasn't dazzling or dramatic, just solid in a way I didn't know I needed. He listened more than he spoke, noticed when I was tired, and treated me like my thoughts carried weight. His parents, James and Carol, welcomed me with open arms that didn't ask for anything in return. Their kindness was steady, not strategic. They didn't compare or control, they trusted. I didn't realize how foreign that feeling was until I had it. At our rehearsal dinner, Noah's father handed me a small silver key in an envelope. "You two built this life together," he said with a smile. "Here's something to help you move forward." Inside was the key to a used car, clean, reliable, titled in my name. It wasn't the car itself that mattered. It was the trust behind it, the acknowledgement that I had earned something of my own. I thanked them through tears, and when I looked across the table, I saw my mother's polite smile flicker. Her eyes darted toward Rachel, quick and automatic, like she'd already found a way to make this gift belong to someone else. The morning of the wedding, Mom fussed over my hair, her perfume heavy in the air. "You've always been so generous, Emily," she said, smoothing my veil with perfectly manicured hands. "Don't lose that quality no matter what." Her words were honeyed, but the meaning underneath was old and familiar. In her world, generosity meant compliance. I smiled at her through the mirror, pretending not to hear the warning inside the compliment. Some habits are hard to unlearn. By the time the ceremony began, the air buzzed with camera flashes and champagne chatter. The rooms sparkled, every detail perfectly staged, the kind of scene my mother lived for. For a brief moment, as Noah's hand settled on my back during our first dance, I thought maybe the storm had finally passed. Maybe the years of small cuts and quiet compromises were behind me. Then I saw her weaving through the crowd, that same poised smile carved onto her face. When she spoke, her voice was soft enough for nearby guests to hear, just loud enough to make sure everyone knew who still held the script. "We're giving the car his parents bought you to your sister," she said again, as if it were nothing more than rearranging flowers. Rachel's laughter followed, light and rehearsed. The world around me, blurred music, chatter, the faint smell of sugar and roses. My mother waited, her hand resting on my arm, expecting a gracious nod for the camera. In that instant, I realized she hadn't come to celebrate me at all. She'd come to test how much of me still belonged to her. The song played on cheerful and bright, while something quiet inside me began to shift. I smiled, just as she taught me, and said nothing. But behind that smile, a new kind of calm began to take shape, the kind that comes right before a storm. When the music faded and the last toast ended, the night felt heavier than it should have. I smiled for pictures, thanked guests, and moved through the room as if nothing had happened. Every gesture was practiced, the way I placed my hand on Noah's shoulder, the tilt of my head when someone offered congratulations. Underneath my chest felt hollow. My mother floated through the crowd, radiant and satisfied, while Rachel's laughter rang from one group to another. They looked like women untouched by consequence. At the table near the dance floor, my father sat half watching, half pretending he didn't notice. He had perfected that act over the years. Mark Carter believed that if he stayed quiet long enough, tension would dissolve on its own. He didn't understand that silence can be just another kind of approval. I watched him lift his glass toward Noah and me, smiling the way men do when they'd rather disappear. My mother caught the moment and squeezed his arm. To anyone else, we looked like a perfect family. Later, as the lights dimmed and guests began drifting toward the doors, I finally exhaled. Noah's hand brushed my back, steady grounding. "You okay?" he murmured. I nodded, though my throat felt tight. We slipped out a side exit into a quiet hallway where the music softened behind the walls. "Do you want me to say something to them?" he asked. I shook my head. No, not yet. He didn't press further. He never did. 2 weeks before the wedding, I'd known something like this could happen. My mother had a habit of turning generosity into ownership. Over the years, clothes, furniture, even my old savings account had quietly shifted from mine to hers or Rachel's, each time with an explanation that sounded noble. Family helps family. It's just a loan. You're more stable. Those phrases built an entire vocabulary of taking. When Noah and I started planning our future, I decided it wouldn't include those phrases anymore. One of my coworkers, Lauren Davis, worked as a paralegal in the same building. Over coffee one morning, I told her about my mother's patterns. Lauren listened without judgment, then said gently, "You need paperwork." A week later, she helped me draw up a notarized declaration. Every gift received in my name would remain legally mine, not to be transferred or sold without my written consent. It sounded cold at first, like something out of a business contract, but it was the first thing that felt safe. Noah read it carefully, nodded once, and signed beside me. Lauren stamped it with her seal and said, "You're not being ungrateful, you're being prepared." Standing in that empty hallway after the reception, I reached for Noah's hand. "We already did," I whispered. He frowned for a second, then understood. He kissed my temple, a quiet acknowledgement that the groundwork was already there. We didn't need to argue with them. We just had to let them show who they really were. A few minutes later, his phone buzzed. It was a text from one of the guests. "Rachel's already posting about the car," he said, turning the screen toward me. There it was, a photo taken in our garage, my sister posing beside the car. Noah's parents had given us her caption reading, "Finally got a ride that fits me." My stomach tightened, then released into something calm. She hadn't even waited until morning. Noah's voice was quiet. "What do we do?" I slipped my hand into my clutch, feeling the weight of the envelope inside. We let them open their own trap. He exhaled slowly, nodded once, and straightened his tie. We walked back toward the sound of music, side by side, every step measured. The ballroom glowed under soft golden lights, but the mood had shifted. Conversations quieted when we entered. My mother stood near the cake table, laughing a little too loudly. Rachel hovered beside her, pretending to scroll through her phone. When they spotted us, Mom's smile widened. "There you are," she said brightly. "Everyone's been looking for the bride." I smiled back, keeping my tone even. I had a few things to handle. "Good," she said, already turning toward the photographer. "We're wrapping up soon. Rachel needs a ride home anyway." Noah took a slow step forward. "She has one now, doesn't she?" His voice was polite, almost cheerful. My mother blinked. "What do you mean?" I looked at Rachel. "The car," I said. "You said she's taking it. Rachel's fingers froze over her phone. "Oh, come on, Emily," she said with a soft laugh. "Don't make this weird. It's just a car." I heard the echo of that phrase from earlier in the night, and something inside me settled into clarity. My father drifted closer, his face lined with worry. "Can we not do this here?" he asked quietly. I turned to him, calm as still water. "This is where it happened, Dad, in front of everyone." The band hesitated mid-song. Even the air seemed to tighten. My mother's smile faltered. "Emily, sweetheart, you're overreacting." It was a misunderstanding. We just thought Noah reached into his jacket and pulled out the envelope. "You might want to read this before you finish that sentence." She hesitated, glancing between us. Then she took it, unfolding the paper with careful fingers. The rustle of the document sounded loud against the music. Rachel leaned in, reading over her shoulder. Their expressions shifted: confusion first, then recognition, and finally the pale wash of understanding. Mom forced a shaky laugh. "What is this?" "Some kind of joke." "A notarized declaration," I said evenly. "Signed 2 weeks ago. It states that all wedding gifts titled in my name can't be transferred, sold, or gifted without my written consent. Any attempt triggers a legal review and cancels future inheritance from Noah's side." The last words landed with the weight of a gavel. Murmurs rippled through the guests nearby. Rachel's face flushed. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice cracking. "You're really doing this here. I'm just keeping things clear," I replied. "You've both blurred enough lines for one lifetime." My father let out a slow breath. "This is petty, Emily." "No," I said softly. "Petty is pretending theft is family tradition." The room went still. My mother's composure hardened, but her voice trembled underneath. "We're family. You don't treat family like criminals. You went into our garage last night," I said, keeping my voice low but steady. "You took pictures of the car and posted them online." Rachel's lips parted, searching for an excuse. "That was a joke," she said quickly. "Symbolic?" Noah asked. "Symbolic of what exactly?" She had no answer. My mother's gaze darted toward the guests, aware now that phones were out, faces turned toward us. "You're being dramatic," she hissed. "Maybe," I said, "but this time there are witnesses." A murmur spread through the tables. Someone whispered to their neighbor. Rachel's chin quivered. "You'd really embarrass your own family." "I'm not embarrassing anyone," I said quietly. "I'm ending the pattern." Noah took my hand again, his presence solid beside me. "Mrs. Carter," he said evenly, "you should keep that paper. It's a legal document." My mother stared at him, wounded. "You encouraged this." He shook his head. "She didn't need encouragement, just respect." Rachel snapped. "You think you're better than us now?" I met her eyes. "No, just finally equal." The silence after that felt heavier than the music ever had. Even the fairy lights above seemed to dim. My mother's voice broke the stillness, soft and desperate. "Emily, please don't do this in front of everyone." I looked at her, calm and clear. "Then you shouldn't have done it to me in front of everyone." The room exhaled a low ripple of whispers. I felt Noah's hand steady against mine. "Play something," he said quietly to the band. After a moment's hesitation, the drummer lifted his sticks and the singer's voice filled the space, again gentle but unshakable. We stepped onto the dance floor. The guests moved aside, unsure whether to watch or pretend nothing had happened. I caught sight of my mother's face, reflected in the mirror, pale, motionless. Rachel's mascara streaked. My father stared at the floor. On the table beside them, the envelope sat between 2 half-empty glasses. Noah whispered, "Breathe." "I am," I said, and for the first time, it was true. When the song ended, I turned toward my parents. "Help isn't theft," I said evenly, "and love isn't access." I set my empty champagne glass beside the envelope, then took Noah's hand and walked away through the quiet murmur of the crowd. The applause never came, only the soft rustle of people realizing something had finally changed. Outside, under the glow of string lights, the air felt lighter. Noah slipped his arm around me. "You did it," he said. I nodded, the night air cool against my skin. "I did what I had to." The music drifted through the doors, fading into the distance. Somewhere inside, my mother's perfect smile had finally fallen. The drive home that night was silent except for the low hum of the car beneath us. My dress rustled against the seat, still carrying the scent of roses and champagne. The city lights blurred outside the window, soft streaks of gold and white. Noah kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting over mine. Neither of us spoke. The quiet wasn't tense. It was full, like the pause after a storm when you're still waiting to see what's left standing. When we pulled into our driveway, the headlights swept across the porch, catching the edge of the welcome mat I'd bought months ago. It read, "Home at last." The words looked different now, heavier somehow. I stepped out of the car, feeling the gravel shift under my heels, and looked back once more at the vehicle they had tried to take from me. Noah opened the front door, and the familiar scent of coffee and cedar met us. Inside, everything was exactly where we left it, calm, untouched hours. In the kitchen, my phone buzzed on the counter, lighting up with messages. There were missed calls from my mother, a few from Rachel, and several from numbers I didn't recognize. The wedding guests must have started talking. I turned the screen face down. For once, I didn't feel the pull to explain or smooth things over. I slipped out of my shoes, set my bouquet in the sink, and leaned against the counter. Noah came up behind me, his hands warm around my shoulders. "Still want that honeymoon drive tomorrow?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Let's take the car." That night I lay awake longer than I expected, watching the ceiling fan turn slow circles above me. Every now and then the house creaked, the sound of settling wood and cooling air. It reminded me of childhood nights when I'd lie awake listening for footsteps in the hallway, waiting for the next argument, the next request, the next favor disguised as affection. This silence was different. It didn't ache. It settled like something finally closing. The next morning, the sunlight cut across the kitchen floor in bright stripes. I brewed coffee while Noah packed our overnight bags. When I opened the fridge, I saw the leftover slice of wedding cake wrapped in plastic. I left it there. Some things don't taste the same the next day. Noah placed his hand on the small of my back as he passed that quiet gesture that always said more than words. "You ready?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "I'm ready." We drove north along the coast, the sky pale and clear. The wind tangled my hair, and for a while we didn't talk at all. The car, the same one my mother had claimed for Rachel, hummed beneath us, steady and sure. Every mile felt like distance from an old wound. We stopped at a small roadside diner around noon. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, pointed to my wedding band and said, "Newlyweds." Noah smiled. "Yesterday." She grinned, poured our coffee, and said, "Well, here's to a good start." After breakfast, we drove a little farther and pulled over at a scenic overlook. The view stretched out for miles, cliffs, waves, sunlight flashing on the water. I leaned against the car and breathed in the salt air. Noah handed me his phone. "Your mom called again," he said gently. "She left a voicemail." I didn't take the phone. "I'll listen later." He didn't push. Instead, he stood beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. "You don't have to fix it," he said. "I know," I whispered. "That's the whole point." We stayed there for a long time, letting the wind whip around us. For once, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the hinge that kept everything in my family moving. I felt like someone who could finally stop turning. When we got back home 2 days later, there was a stack of envelopes on the porch. Most were cards from relatives who hadn't attended the wedding, but one stood out, thick paper, my mother's handwriting on the front. I held it for a moment, then set it on the entry table unopened. Noah watched me quietly. "You sure?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Whatever's inside, I already know how it ends." That evening I made dinner while he sorted through the mail. The kitchen light was warm, the kind of golden glow that makes everything look softer. My phone buzzed again, and I finally checked it, a message from Rachel. "You didn't have to humiliate us like that," she wrote. "Mom's sick over it. Dad's furious. I hope it was worth it." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back one word: boundaries. Then I turned the phone off. A week passed before the noise began to fade. The phone stopped ringing. The posts slowed down. Whatever storm they'd tried to create was burning itself out. I went back to work, easing into my projects, the normal rhythm of color palettes and client meetings. Lauren stopped by my office one afternoon with a cup of coffee and a smile. Heard the wedding was unforgettable, she joked softly. I smiled back. You could say that. She sat on the edge of my desk, her tone gentler now. You did what you had to. That paper didn't just protect a car, it protected your peace. Her words stayed with me. It wasn't about the object. It never had been. It was about ownership, not of things, but of self. My mother had spent decades teaching me that love was proof through sacrifice. For the first time, I was rewriting that lesson. A few days later, I finally listened to her voicemail. Her voice was tight, trembling under its usual polish. Emily, we need to talk. This isn't how families should treat each other. Call me back. There was a pause, and then softer. I didn't mean for things to go that far. I set the phone down, unsure what to feel. The part of me that once would have rushed to call back was gone. I deleted the message and went to water the plants by the window. That night, I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, looking at the photo from the wedding that Noah had framed. It wasn't of the ceremony or the dance, it was the moment my mother's smile broke, and I stood holding the envelope. I used to think the picture looked harsh. Now it looked honest. The truth wasn't cruel, it was clean. The next morning I found Rachel's car, parked at the end of our street. She sat inside, engine idling, pretending to check her phone. I stepped outside with my coffee and walked toward her. When she saw me, she rolled down the window halfway. Mom sent me, she said, eyes darting. She wants to talk. I shook my head. Then she can call Noah's attorney. Her mouth opened, then closed. You really don't care, do you? I met her eyes evenly. I finally do. Just not in the way you think. She didn't answer. After a moment, she put the car in gear and drove off. The exhaust curled up behind her, fading into the morning air. I stood there until the sound disappeared, then went back inside. That evening, Noah found me sitting on the porch steps, the sky streaked with orange and pink. You okay? He asked. I nodded. I think this is what peace sounds like. He sat beside me, our shoulders touching. The cicadas had started their evening chorus steady and calm. Inside, the unopened letter still sat on the entry table. I didn't need to read it, to understand what it meant. One last attempt to pull me back into a pattern I'd finally broken. I left it there untouched. Sometimes closure isn't an answer. It's the decision not to ask the question again. As the sun sank lower, the porch light flickered on. The air smelled faintly of rain and lavender from the flower bed. I rested my head against Noah's shoulder, watching the last traces of daylight fade. Somewhere beyond that quiet, my mother was probably rewriting the story, telling herself I'd overreacted, that I'd made her the villain. Maybe she even believed it. But the truth didn't need defending anymore. It just needed distance. Tomorrow, I'd go back to work, back to my clients, back to the life I'd built without permission. But for now, I stayed still, the evening settling around me. For the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The first week of quiet didn't last long. One Tuesday morning, while I was reviewing a design plan for a new client, my phone rang again, the screen flashing my mother's name. I stared at it until it stopped. Then it rang again. By the fifth missed call, Noah glanced over from the kitchen. She's not going to stop, he said. I nodded, but I wasn't ready to answer. The next day, a message came from my father instead, short and careful. Your mother isn't well. Maybe you could talk to her. I knew that tone guilt wrapped in concern meant to sound gentle, but carrying weight. By the end of the week, they had found a new way to reach me. A letter arrived by courier, hand-delivered, and signed at the bottom in my father's neat handwriting. Inside, my mother had written 3 pages in her looping script. The first paragraph was an apology, the next a list of reasons why things had spiraled out of control. She wrote that she'd been emotional, that people had misunderstood her, that Rachel had only meant to help. Near the end, her tone shifted. Family is about forgiveness, she wrote. We've all made mistakes, Emily. Let's start over before people begin to think we've lost our way. The words carried that familiar sweetness, the kind that never truly reached the heart. Noah read the letter over my shoulder. She's worried about appearances, he said quietly. Not you. I folded the pages carefully, slid them back into the envelope, and tucked it in a drawer. I'm done performing for them, I said. If she wants to talk, it has to be different this time. That weekend, Rachel showed up at our doorstep. Her car idled at the curb, engine running. She wore sunglasses despite the overcast sky, her voice light but strained. Mom said you won't answer her calls, she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. She's really upset, Emily. She thinks you hate her. I motioned toward the couch. I don't hate her, I said, but I'm not going back to pretending. Rachel crossed her arms. You made her look awful in front of everyone. Do you have any idea how that felt? I met her eyes. Do you have any idea how it's felt for me the last 29 years? The silence that followed stretched between us. Rachel looked away first. She didn't mean to hurt you, she murmured. She just gets carried away. I almost smiled at the word carried. That was how my mother moved through life, carried by excuses, carried by other people's forgiveness. I shook my head. Tell her I'm not coming to Sunday dinner. If she wants to talk, she can meet me somewhere neutral. Rachel hesitated. You mean without Dad? Without the performance, I said. 2 days later, my mother called again. This time I answered. Her voice was careful, too smooth. Emily. I'm so glad you picked up, she said. I think we've both had time to cool down. I listened, saying nothing. I'd like to see you, she continued. There's a new cafe by the lake. Just us girls. How does that sound? I agreed, though part of me knew it wouldn't just be coffee. The cafe was quiet that afternoon, all soft music and glass windows overlooking the water. My mother was already there when I arrived, seated near the corner. Her posture was perfect, her smile rehearsed. You look lovely, she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. I've missed you. I took my seat, careful to keep my expression neutral. She spoke first, apologizing for the misunderstanding at the wedding, calling it a lapse in judgment, a stressful day. Rachel was devastated, she said, her eyes glossy. People are still talking about it. You've always been the strong one. Maybe it's time to help us fix this. I looked at her, trying to find any trace of sincerity. Fix what exactly, I asked. The way it looked, she said quickly, as if that were the obvious answer. Then lowering her voice, she added, I need you to take down that legal declaration. It's causing tension between the families. Your father says Noah's parents are upset. There it was, the real reason for the meeting. They're not upset, I said quietly. They just know boundaries when they see them. She frowned. Emily, please, you're making everything harder than it needs to be. Her tone softened again, sliding into familiarity. We can put this behind us, but only if you're willing to move forward. For a moment, I almost believed she meant it. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a thin gold bracelet, delicate, elegant, and unmistakably hers. This was your grandmother's, she said. I want you to have it. Let's call it a fresh start. The gesture was pretty practiced and empty. I closed the box and set it on the table. I don't need gifts, I said. I just need honesty. Her eyes hardened. You've changed, she said, voice low. You sound just like him. I knew who she meant, Noah. The room seemed to shrink around us. He's been very good to me, I said evenly. He's teaching you to turn against your family, she snapped. I can hear it in your voice. I took a slow breath. No one taught me this. I finally learned it. She stared at me speechless for the first time in years. Then she leaned back, regaining her composure. If you walk away from this family, don't expect us to come running next time you need something. Her words were sharp, deliberate. I stood smoothing my coat. I never asked you to run, I said, just to stop taking what isn't yours. As I walked out, the bracelet still sitting on the table, I caught her reflection in the glass, her mouth trembling, the mask slipping. Outside, the wind off the lake carried the faint scent of rain. I stood there for a moment, breathing it in the sky, gray and calm. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to chase her down or fix what was broken. When I got home, Noah was in the living room reading. He looked up when I came in. How'd it go? He asked. As expected, I said, hanging up my coat. She brought a peace offering. He smiled sadly. And you left it there? I nodded. It wasn't mine to take. That night, I found myself in the kitchen again, the same spot where I'd stood after the wedding. The house was quiet, the light from the window pale and steady. I opened the drawer where I'd placed her first letter and set it beside the envelope from today. 2 pieces of paper, 2 different versions of the same story, both trying to pull me back into her narrative. I closed the drawer gently. Some ties don't need to be cut with anger. They just need to stop being picked up. The next morning, a message appeared on my work phone. It was from my father. "You hurt her," he said flatly. "She's trying her best, and you're making it worse." I stared at the screen, then deleted the message without replying. That evening, I took a walk along the shoreline. The air was cool, the sky streaked with orange. Somewhere across the water, the cafe lights shimmered faintly. I thought of my mother sitting there, still trying to arrange the world so it would look perfect again. Maybe she would tell people we'd made peace, that the bracelet had done its job. I didn't need to correct her anymore. The truth didn't depend on her version of it. When I returned home, Noah was waiting on the porch. "You did what you could," he said softly. "Now let her be." I nodded, leaning against him as the porch light flickered on. The quiet around us wasn't empty. It was the kind that holds room for something new. Inside, the phone remained silent for the first time in days. I knew it wouldn't last. Families like mine don't surrender control easily. But I also knew that whatever came next, I wouldn't meet it the same way again. For a while, the quiet felt real. Work filled my days, and the evenings settled into a rhythm I hadn't known before dinner with Noah walks by the water and long stretches where no one demanded anything from me. The silence in the house was gentle, not heavy. I almost started to believe it might last. Then one Thursday morning, a certified letter arrived at my office. It was from Rachel Miller, a family friend who had handled my parents' estate paperwork years ago. I hadn't spoken to her in ages. Inside the envelope was a formal request for mediation filed by my parents. The wording was polite but pointed. They wished to clarify misunderstandings regarding family property and gifts. My first thought was disbelief. Then I noticed the date of the meeting the following Monday. My mother wasn't just trying to talk anymore. She was trying to rewrite the record. That evening, I showed the letter to Noah. He read it twice, then handed it back. "Do you want me to come with you?" he asked. "No," I said, "but I'll bring the paperwork." He nodded slowly. "Then go prepared." Monday morning, I walked into Rachel Miller's office in a slate gray suit. My mother was already seated. Her expression composed, my father beside her, avoiding eye contact. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and tension. Rachel greeted me with a polite smile. "Emily, thank you for coming. Your parents just want to clear the air." I sat down across from them, setting a neat folder on the table. "Then let's be clear," I said. My mother folded her hands. "This isn't about hostility." She began, her tone calm and practiced. "It's about fairness. You've taken measures that make us look divided, and people are starting to talk." She glanced at Rachel, who nodded sympathetically. "We simply want to resolve this quietly." I opened my folder and slid a copy of the notarized declaration across the table. "You mean this?" My mother's smile faltered. "That paper has caused embarrassment," she said softly. "To us, to Rachel, to your father's business relationships." I met her eyes. Then maybe those relationships weren't built on the right things. Rachel Miller shifted in her chair. "Emily, your mother just wants everyone to move forward peacefully. Perhaps there's a compromise, a way to remove the clause without undermining your intention." I leaned back. "The only compromise I've ever made with this family was silence. That contract stays." My father finally spoke, his voice weary. "You're making a mistake, Emily. This isn't how families heal." I looked at him, thinking of the years I'd spent trying to heal things that never wanted to get better. "I'm not trying to heal something that keeps reopening," I said quietly. The meeting ended without agreement. My mother gathered her purse with a stiff motion. "You'll regret this one day," she said as she stood. "You're turning your back on where you came from." I looked at her calmly. "No, I'm turning away from what you turned me into." Outside, the air felt sharp and clean. I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine. My phone buzzed with a text from Noah. "You okay?" I typed back. "Better than I've ever been." The next few weeks passed in uneasy calm. My parents stopped calling. Rachel deleted her social media, disappearing into silence that felt strategic. I focused on work, finishing a large design project for a client who owned several boutique hotels along the coast. When the deal closed, my boss offered me a promotion to senior design consultant. For the first time, I felt like my own success didn't need to be shared or explained. One afternoon, while preparing for a meeting, I got an email from Noah's mother, Carol. The subject line simply said, "Checking in." She wrote that she and James were proud of how I handled myself, that they'd heard whispers about the wedding from mutual acquaintances but knew the truth. Her note ended with, "Respect isn't inherited, it's chosen." I read it twice, the words settling somewhere deep. That weekend, Noah and I drove to his parents' house for dinner. The table was warm with laughter and easy conversation, the kind of comfort I'd never had growing up. Carol poured me tea and said, "You know, James and I were thinking of setting up a charitable grant, something in your field, maybe supporting young designers." Noah smiled across the table. "That's all her mom. She's been mentoring junior staff at work already." I laughed softly. "Just trying to give others the start I never got." The conversation drifted to lighter topics, travel plans for the holidays. But as we were leaving, Carol caught my hand at the door. "Don't let anyone convince you that peace is the same as surrender," she said gently. Her voice reminded me of what real kindness sounded like, steady without agenda. The next morning, I woke to find a text from Rachel. "Mom's in the hospital." My stomach tightened. I called immediately, and Rachel answered on the first ring. "She fainted during a meeting," she said. "They're running tests. You should come." For a moment, I couldn't speak. "Is she okay?" I finally asked. "They don't know yet," Rachel said. "Dad's here. Please, Emily, just come." I hesitated, then told Noah what happened. "You should go," he said. "Not for her, for you." The hospital was quiet when I arrived. My father sat in the hallway, his hands clasped tightly, staring at the floor. He looked up when he saw me. "She'll be fine," he said, though his voice shook. Rachel stood near the window, her eyes red. When the nurse waved me in, I walked into the room slowly. My mother lay against white pillows, her face pale but composed. Her eyes opened when she heard my footsteps. "You came," she whispered. I pulled a chair to her bedside. Rachel called me. She gave a small nod, her expression unreadable. "I didn't mean for things to go this far," she said softly. "I just wanted us to stay close." I looked at her, unsure how to answer. "Sometimes staying close means knowing when to stop pulling," I said. Her eyes glistened, and for a moment she looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. The doctor entered, breaking the stillness. He explained that she was dehydrated and exhausted, her blood pressure dangerously high. "Stress is likely a contributing factor," he said. My mother's gaze flicked toward me, almost defensive, as if even her illness needed a story. I stayed for a while longer, mostly in silence. When I stood to leave, she reached for my hand. "You've always been so independent," she said weakly. "I used to think that was a flaw. Maybe I was wrong." Her voice cracked on the last word. I squeezed her hand lightly. "Rest, Mom," I said. "That's enough for now." Outside, Rachel followed me into the parking lot. She meant that she said quietly, "She's scared." I nodded. "Maybe she should be," I said, then softened my tone. "But I hope she uses it to change." Driving home, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and relief. The confrontation, the hospital, the years of tension. It all felt like one long exhale. I didn't know if forgiveness would ever fit between us, but for the first time, I didn't need it to survive. That night, Noah found me on the couch staring at the dark window. "You did the right thing," he said. "You showed up, but you didn't give in." I leaned against him, listening to the quiet hum of the house. Somewhere deep down, I knew the story with my family wasn't over. But whatever came next, it wouldn't be written on their terms anymore. The hospital visit changed the rhythm of everything. For a while, there were fewer calls, fewer letters, and fewer attempts to pull me back into the same conversations that had followed me all my life. My mother came home within a week, and Rachel sent short updates every few days, blood pressure improving. Doctor pleased back to normal. Each message ended with a line that sounded like a test. "She'd love to see you." I never replied. Instead, I threw myself into work. The hotel project I'd been managing was nearing completion, and every room reflected months of late nights and careful choices. When the owner decided to host a small feature in a local magazine, I barely thought twice about it. I spent the morning walking a reporter through the property, explaining textures, color palettes, and how I wanted guests to feel when they walked in. The photographer followed, quietly snapping photos, while I adjusted curtains and smoothed table linens. The reporter's name was Evelyn Harper, a woman with calm eyes and a voice that made people open up without realizing it. She asked about my background, how I started in design, and whether anyone had inspired me. I hesitated before answering. "I think I learned what not to imitate first," I said finally. She smiled faintly, as if she understood more than I'd said aloud. A week later, the article came out. It was titled, "From Blueprint to Balance: How Designer Emily Carter Redefines Home." The piece focused on the theme of independence and how creating spaces for others had helped me build stability for myself. It was flattering, but simple, until the last paragraph where Evelyn had quoted me saying, "Peace isn't something I was given. It's something I built." I didn't realize how far that line would travel. 2 days after the article was published, my phone started buzzing again. Calls from numbers I didn't recognize, messages from old acquaintances, even one from a distant cousin I hadn't heard from in years. They all said the same thing, that they'd seen my mother's comment online. She had posted beneath the article's link on social media, proud of our daughter for finally admitting she learned everything from home. It wasn't cruel, but it was deliberate. A polished twist, the kind of statement that sounded generous until you looked at it closely. Within hours, the comment had picked up likes and replies. Rachel had added her own message beneath it. "That's Mom's way of showing love." I stared at the screen, the words swimming. It was subtle, but it stung more than any argument could have. When Noah got home that evening, he found me sitting at the kitchen counter, still staring at my phone. He read the comment once and set the phone down gently. "She's trying to pull you back into her story," he said. "Don't take the bait." I nodded, though part of me wanted to say something not for attention but for truth. I didn't respond online. Instead, I sent a private message to Evelyn thanking her for the feature. She replied within minutes. "Your story resonated with a lot of people. Don't let anyone reshape it." Her words steadied me. The next weekend, I visited the hotel for the grand opening. The lobby buzzed with conversation, the scent of fresh flowers and polished wood filling the air. As I mingled with guests, I noticed a familiar figure near the entrance, Rachel, standing in a pale blue dress, scanning the room. I froze for a moment, then walked toward her. "What are you doing here?" I asked quietly. She smiled, a practiced curve of her lips. "Mom told me about the event. She thought it might be good for us to support you. The phrasing for us to support you told me everything." "This isn't a family showcase, Rachel," I said. "It's work." She frowned. "You're really going to make a scene here?" "No," I said softly. "You already did." Before she could reply, Evelyn appeared beside us, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "You must be Rachel," she said smoothly. "Emily mentioned her family. I've been hoping to meet you." Rachel blinked momentarily, disarmed. Evelyn handed her a glass, then turned to me. "They're ready for your speech." Rachel's mouth opened, then closed again. She placed the glass on a nearby table and walked out without another word. Later that night, when the crowd had thinned, Evelyn found me by the terrace doors. "You handled that with grace," she said. "Some people don't know how to exist outside the picture they've drawn." I smiled faintly. "You've met my family, then?" She laughed softly. "I've met enough people like them." That conversation marked the start of something unexpected. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn reached out often, first about design pieces, then just to talk. She'd been through her own version of control, disguised as care, and though our stories were different, they mirrored each other in small ways. One afternoon she said, "You ever think about using what you've learned to help others?" The question lingered with me. That night I sat at my desk and began drafting an idea, a mentorship program for young women in creative fields, especially those starting from nothing or rebuilding after difficult family situations. By morning, I had a full outline. I called it Project Homeground. When I showed the plan to Noah, he smiled. "That sounds exactly like you," he said. turning pain into structure. With his help and later with Evelyn's connections, the project took off faster than I expected. Within a month, 3 mentees had joined, all bright, determined women who reminded me of who I used to be. As the program grew, my parents' silence returned. Rachel still sent occasional messages, each one smaller and less urgent than the last. My father's birthday came and went with no call either way. The absence didn't hurt. It clarified. One evening, as I wrapped up paperwork at my office, Lauren knocked on the doorframe. "You're trending again," she said with a smile. I looked up puzzled. She held out her phone showing a photo of me and Evelyn from the grand opening, now circulating with a short write-up about Project Homeground. The caption read, "Designer who stood her ground builds something for others to stand on." For a moment, I just stared at the screen. It wasn't fame or vindication, it was visibility, the kind that couldn't be taken or twisted. That weekend, another envelope arrived at my house, but this one wasn't from my family. It was a formal notice of donation. The Bennetts had contributed a significant amount to fund scholarships through the project. Noah's parents didn't call to announce it. They just believed in what I was doing. When I told Noah, he smiled. "Looks like the foundation's official now." I nodded, feeling something I hadn't in years, steadiness without tension. That night, sitting on the porch, I watched the sun drop below the trees. The quiet felt different this time, not an absence, but a presence full of space I could finally fill with my own life. I didn't know that a message from my mother was already waiting in my inbox, short-clipped and ominous. "We need to talk about the family property. You've gone too far this time." I closed the laptop without opening it. The wind moved through the yard, soft and steady, like a warning I'd already learned to understand. When my mother's email arrived, I didn't open it right away. It sat in my inbox for hours, the subject line visible on the screen, "Family Property, Immediate Discussion Required." The wording was sharp, deliberate, and unmistakably hers. That night, I finally read it. She claimed that my grandmother's small vacation cabin in Blue Ridge, which had been left in my name, should now return to the family. She wrote that it was selfish of me to keep it while they were managing new financial pressures. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had never cared about that cabin when it sat empty, but now that I was building something of my own, suddenly it mattered. Noah found me standing by the window with the laptop open. He read the message over my shoulder, then quietly said, "They're trying to find new ground to control." I closed the computer. Not this time. The cabin had belonged to my grandmother Ruth, a quiet woman who loved mountain air and handwritten letters. She was the only person in my family who ever told me that being kind didn't mean being small. When she passed, she left the cabin to me directly separate from everything else. My mother had seen it as an insult. That place was supposed to go to the family she'd said at the time, meaning herself. I hadn't been back there in years, but the thought of them claiming it now stirred something deep. The next morning, I forwarded the email to Lauren at work with a short note. "Need your advice." She stopped by my office within an hour, legal pad in hand. "If they're talking about property, we'll handle it formally," she said. "Do you have the deed?" I nodded. "In a safety box." She smiled faintly. "Then they don't have a case, but if they push, you might want to visit the cabin, make sure it's documented properly." That weekend, Noah and I packed the car and drove toward the Blue Ridge Mountains. The farther we went, the quieter the roads became, rows of pines, small gas stations, the smell of rain and soil in the air. When we reached the cabin, it looked just like I remembered: weathered wood, a green tin roof, and wildflowers curling along the porch. Dust clung to the windows, but the structure stood strong. Inside, everything was still the scent of cedar, a few old quilts folded neatly on the couch, and a framed photo of my grandmother smiling from the mantel. I ran my fingers across the worn edges of the counter where we used to make biscuits together. "She'd hate what this turned into," I said softly. Noah put his arm around me. "Then let's make sure her wishes stay protected." We spent the weekend cleaning, taking photos, and updating the inventory list Lauren had recommended. The simple work felt grounding. Late Sunday afternoon, I found a small box tucked behind a stack of books. Inside were a few envelopes, letters from my grandmother addressed to me but never mailed. Each one was dated in the months before she passed. The handwriting wobbled but clear enough to read. In one, she wrote, "If you ever feel them trying to take what's yours, remember, it's not about the object. It's about the space you've built inside yourself." I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my bag. When we got home, there was another message waiting this time from my father. "Your mother is upset. She says you're being difficult again. Can we talk this out before lawyers get involved?" I didn't reply. Lauren had already filed a formal notice of ownership verification. I knew what that meant. They couldn't touch the property without risking a legal counterclaim. 3 days later, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. Her tone was icy clipped, but beneath it was something new, desperation. "Emily," she said, "I don't understand why you're doing this. We're family. You have more than enough. Your sister could use that cabin for her retreat project. You don't even go there." Her voice cracked. "Why are you so intent on punishing us?" I listened to it twice, then deleted it. Noah found me at the counter, staring into space. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "For once, I think I am." The next weekend, Project Homeground hosted its first official fundraiser. The event was small but elegant, held in a renovated art gallery downtown, filled with soft lighting and framed photos from the mentorship program. Evelyn gave the opening speech, her words simple but powerful. "We build homes for others," she said, "but the hardest one to build is the one inside yourself." When she mentioned my name, the audience applauded. I caught Noah's smile across the room, warm and steady. Halfway through the evening, as I stood greeting guests, I saw movement near the entrance. My parents had arrived. My mother was dressed immaculately, my father stiff beside her. For a moment, the room blurred. Evelyn leaned close and whispered, "You don't owe them a scene. Just stand tall." My mother approached, all smiles for the onlookers. "Darling, this is quite something," she said, her voice bright but brittle. "We came to show support." I met her gaze evenly. "You weren't invited." Her expression didn't change, but her eyes darkened. "You make us sound unwelcome." "Because you are," I said quietly. "This event is about boundaries and rebuilding. You've spent your whole life ignoring both." The air around us thickened. Guests began to turn, whispering softly. My mother's smile faltered for the first time. "You're humiliating yourself," she hissed under her breath. "You're embarrassing the family." I straightened, keeping my tone even. "I'm not embarrassing anyone. I'm reclaiming my peace." My father tugged at her sleeve. "Linda," he said quietly, "let's go." But she didn't move. "You think you've won?" she said. "That little foundation doesn't make you better than us." I felt Noah step beside me, his hand brushing mine. "This isn't about winning," I said. "It's about ending what never should have started." There was a long pause. Then she turned sharply and walked out, my father following behind. The sound of the door closing echoed through the gallery. Evelyn touched my shoulder lightly. "You handled that perfectly." I exhaled slowly, realizing my hands were trembling. I didn't think they'd actually come. "People like that always do," she said. "They need the audience." When the event ended and the last guest left, Noah and I stayed behind to help clean up. He handed me my coat, his expression thoughtful. "You didn't just defend yourself tonight," he said. "You set a standard for every woman in that room." I smiled faintly. I just said what needed to be said. Outside, the night air was cool, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was walking away from my family. I felt like I was walking toward my life. The next morning, I received an email from Evelyn. Attached was a link to an article she'd published overnight titled, "The Cost of Control: When Family Becomes a Mirror You Refuse to Face." It didn't name anyone, but anyone who'd been there understood. It went viral locally within hours. By evening, Rachel called. "Mom's furious," she said. "She says you've ruined her reputation." I stayed silent for a moment, then said, "Maybe she should ask why it needed protecting." Rachel sighed. "You really think this is over?" "No," I said quietly. "But I think it's finally honest." When I hung up, I looked out the window. The sky was heavy with rain, the kind that sounds like forgiveness if you listen long enough. I didn't know what would come next, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. In the weeks after the fundraiser, things grew quiet again. The article Evelyn wrote spread farther than any of us expected, shared by women's groups, local networks, even small business pages that saw it as a story about courage. People reached out from all over, some to thank me, others to share their own stories of families that looked perfect from the outside but felt like traps inside. For the first time, I didn't feel alone in what I'd gone through. Project Homeground flourished faster than I could keep up with. What began as a small mentorship idea turned into a registered foundation within months. Noah handled the logistics I couldn't, and Evelyn used her contacts to bring in sponsors. We rented a modest office downtown with a glass door that caught the morning light, and every time I unlocked it, I felt something settle, like I'd finally stepped into the life I was meant to have. My mother never called after the gallery incident. Rachel sent a few half-hearted texts about family misunderstandings, but even those stopped when it became clear I wasn't taking the bait. I didn't wish them harm, but I also didn't chase the kind of peace that required me to disappear to earn it. The silence between us wasn't bitter anymore. It was simply space. One afternoon, while reviewing scholarship applications, I received a letter in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. It was from my father. The envelope was plain, no return address. Just my name, written neatly in blue ink. Inside was a single page. He wrote that he'd been following the Foundation's work quietly, and that he hoped I knew how proud he was, even if he hadn't said it out loud. Then at the bottom, he added one line that caught me off guard. "Your mother reads every article about you. She'll never admit it, but she keeps them in a drawer." I folded the letter slowly and placed it beside my grandmother's old one from the cabin. There was no anger left in me, only a soft ache for what could have been. A few weeks later, I returned to that cabin for the first time since everything had settled. The air was crisp, and the trees along the ridge burned gold with autumn. I opened the windows, letting the cool breeze roll through, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. It was quiet except for the low creak of the porch and the sound of leaves drifting across the steps. I found myself sitting at the same worn kitchen table where I'd once baked biscuits with my grandmother. Her old letters were still in my bag. I took them out and read the last one again. "Peace isn't loud, Emily. It doesn't ask to be seen. It's the sound of something finally ending so something honest can begin." The words settled over me like a whisper. When Noah joined me later that evening, he brought dinner from town and 2 mugs of coffee. We sat on the porch in the fading light, watching the fog rise through the trees. "You did it?" he said quietly. I smiled. "We did it." He shook his head. "No, you broke a pattern. That's harder than anything else." I leaned into him, listening to the hum of crickets and the faint rush of wind through the pines. Somewhere behind us, the house lights glowed, soft and steady. No audience, no pretending, no need to prove anything. I thought about all the versions of myself that had walked through that front door. The daughter who apologized, the sister who gave in, the woman who kept trying to be enough. They were all still part of me, but they no longer led the way. The foundation continued to grow. Within a year, we partnered with design schools across the state, offering internships for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. At the ribbon cutting for our new workspace, I gave a short speech about the power of starting over. The crowd clapped, and in the back of the room I caught a glimpse of someone who looked like my mother. Same height, same posture, standing near the exit. But when I blinked, she was gone. Maybe it was just a stranger. Maybe not. Either way, I felt no anger. Just gratitude that I no longer needed her permission to feel whole. On the drive home that evening, I thought about how much had changed since that wedding day, how one sentence, one public boundary had shifted everything. Sometimes it takes a single act of defiance to reveal the truth that love without respect is just control dressed in nicer clothes. I still get letters from women who see themselves in my story, mothers, daughters, sisters, trying to unlearn the idea that giving is the same as being loved. They ask how I found the strength to draw the line. I tell them it wasn't strength at first. It was survival. Strength came later in the quiet that followed. These days, my life feels simpler. I spend mornings in the office, evenings with Noah, weekends in the mountains when we can. The phone doesn't ring the way it used to, and when it does, it's mostly good news. Sometimes that still surprises me that peace can be this ordinary. Looking back, I don't regret the distance or the silence that came after. Some stories don't end in reconciliation. They end in release. And that's its own kind of healing. If you've ever had to stand your ground with people who called it love, if you've ever built peace from pieces someone tried to take, I hope my story reminds you that you're not alone. Share your thoughts below and take care of your own boundaries first. They're the foundation for every home you'll ever build.